You know, it's amazing how a movie can stir up so much controversy even before it even hits the theaters.
Yeah, definitely.
And right now, that's what's happening with this film, Phule, all about the lives of Mahatma, Jyotiba Phule, and Savitribai Phule.
Hmm.
These 19th century social reformers, I mean, they really shook things up in their time.
Totally. They were real pioneers.
Yeah.
When you look at the work they did, fighting against caste discrimination tirelessly and really pushing for women's education, it's clear that their impact goes far beyond just their own lifetime.
Right.
They really laid the foundation for so much of what we talk about today when we talk about social justice. It's like their story, even though it's set way back then, it's still so relevant today.
Absolutely. The original plan was for Phule, which stars Pati Gandhi and Patruleka, to come out on April 11th, 2025,
Mm.
Mahatma Phur's birth anniversary, so it felt like a really fitting date.
Yeah.
But now the release has been pushed back to April 21st, and a big reason for this delay is because of some pretty serious objections from the Central Board of Film Certification.
Yeah. The CBFC, they have a tough job.
Yeah.
They're the ones who decide if a film can be shown publicly in India. And in this case, their concerns have really sparked a wider debate
Yeah.
about how we show history, especially when it touches on such sensitive topics like caste. And, where's the line between artistic freedom and the potential impact something like this could have on society?
Exactly. They've actually gone so far as to ask for specific cuts in the film, things they want removed that are related to caste terms and references. And obviously, this has got people talking
Oh, yeah.
with lots of different opinions on whether these changes are necessary or if they're actually going to damage the film. So here we are with a film that's trying to portray the real history of caste, and it's bumping up against modern sensitivities and how people see things today.
Right.
And right in the middle of it all is the CBFC.
Yeah, it's a challenge that comes up again and again when you're dealing with stories from the past,
Right.
especially when they're about social injustices.
Yeah.
How do you show those past wrongs authentically in a way that makes people think and understand?
Yeah.
But without, some people worry about making things worse, making existing divisions even deeper. It's a real balancing act. And, the Fools, their whole lives were about challenging the status quo.
Exact.
So any honest portrayal of them is going to touch on some nerves.
For sure. So let's break down exactly what the CBFC is objecting to. What is it that made them step in?
Okay.
They've reportedly asked for terms like Mahar and Peshvai to be taken out,
Mm-hmm.
and even references to Manu's system of caste.
Right.
And these aren't just random words. They're really deeply connected to the historical context of what the Fools were fighting for.
Yeah, each of those terms carries a lot of historical weight,
Mm-hmm.
and they're essential for understanding the world the Fools lived in and the specific things they were battling against. Like take Mahar and Mang, for example.
Right.
Those are communities that were historically pushed to the very bottom of the caste hierarchy. They faced terrible discrimination in pretty much every aspect of their lives.
What?
And the Fools were strong advocates for the rights of these groups, for lifting them up from that historical marginalization.
Right. They were actively working to dismantle centuries of systemic oppression.
Exactly.
And then we have this term Peshvai. What does that mean in terms of understanding the world the Fools were living in?
Well, the Peshvai refers to the time when the Peshwas, they were like prime ministers of the Maratha Empire.
Okay.
They held a lot of power. And during a very important period, this administration in the Maharashtra region was primarily controlled by Brahmins.
Got it.
And under their rule caste, hierarchies and discriminatory practices were often very rigidly enforced.
Right.
So when we understand the Peshvai, it helps us understand the specific socio-political environment that the Fools were up against in 19th century Maharashtra.
So it really sets the scene for the power struggles they were facing.
Yes, it shows the established order that they were challenging.
Okay. And then there's Manu's system of caste, which
No.
sounds like the very foundation of this whole caste system.
It is Manu's system is often linked to this ancient text called the Manusmriti.
Okay.
And it basically provided a religious and philosophical justification for the whole idea of dividing society into these different castes,
Wow.
with Brahmins at the top and then those considered Shudras and Dalits at the bottom. The Fools completely rejected this system.
Right.
They saw it as the root of so much injustice and inequality.
Yeah.
So by referencing Manu's system in the film, it would be like highlighting the very ideology that the fools dedicated their lives to dismantling.
Right. So it's not just about social practices, it's about the very beliefs that kept those practices in place.
Exactly.
Now, the CBFC's reasoning for wanting these terms removed is centered around this idea of sensitivity and the potential to ruffle feathers. And I mean, obviously, caste is still a hugely sensitive issue in India, even today in 2025.
It's incredibly sensitive and complex. It's woven into the very fabric of Indian society.
Right.
And the CBFC's caution probably comes from this desire to avoid any kind of social unrest
Yeah.
or, making existing tensions worse. Their job is to think about how a film might affect public order and harmony.
Right.
And we've seen before how historical dramas or films dealing with social issues can sometimes provoke strong reactions.
Exactly. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you take out these terms, these specific references, aren't you basically watering down history? It's like trying to explain a medical diagnosis without using the actual medical terms. You lose that precision and clarity.
Right.
One of our sources actually made this comparison to making a Titanic movie, but without the iceberg.
Oh, wow.
You're missing the whole point of the story.
That's a great analogy. And by leaving out these specific references, the film risks losing crucial historical context and really diminishing what the Fool's struggle was all about. Their fight wasn't against some vague idea of unfairness.
Right.
It was a direct confrontation with a system that had specific names for communities, specific power structures, and a specific ideological foundation.
Yeah.
Taking out those terms could actually minimize the historical realities and the incredible courage it took for the Fools to challenge those things head on.
It's a really important point. So it's not just the CBFC that has concerns about this film, the Brahmin Federation, which is represented by their spokesperson, Anand Dev. They also have objections.
Yes, they do.
So what are their main points of contention?
Well, the biggest thing for them is the worry that the film might portray Brahmins as the only bad guys in this whole story of caste oppression. They argue that it's way more complicated than that historically,
Right.
and that the film might be overlooking times when Brahmins actually supported the Fool's efforts to change things.
Okay.
They're concerned that it'll paint their entire community as the oppressors.
They even specifically brought up a scene where a Brahmin child throws mud at Savitribai Phule.
Right.
And apparently this was a real event, something that's historically documented, but the Federation sees it as defamation and an unfair generalization of how their community acted.
Yeah, and this really highlights the challenge of representing history. Because even though specific events might be documented, how they're portrayed in a film can be interpreted as reflecting broader societal attitudes.
Right.
The Federation's point is that it's important to remember that history is nuanced,
Yeah.
and that within any community, you're going to have a whole range of thoughts and actions.
Exactly.
Not every member of any group is going to hold the same views or act in the same way, especially during a particular historical period.
Yeah, it's a really valid point. How do you show historical events in a truthful way without falling into these simplistic generalizations that can end up perpetuating negative stereotypes?
That's the question.
Yeah, and they also brought up the concern that the film could unintentionally stir up caste-based tensions.
Right.
And in a country like India, with so much historical and social diversity, that's a concern that comes up a lot.
Absolutely. The fear of making existing social divisions worse
Yeah.
is a big factor in how people react to and scrutinize historical narratives.
Right.
But it also raises this other really important question.
What's that?
Can a society truly move forward if it avoids dealing with the difficult and uncomfortable truths of its past? Sometimes ignoring historical injustices can actually get in the way of understanding and empathy.
That's interesting.
And it can potentially perpetuate this lack of awareness about the roots of the inequalities we see today.
Yeah.
It's this careful balance between recognizing sensitivities and also encouraging an open and honest dialogue about history.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of this debate, we have people like Jitendra Awad, who's a Nationalist Congress Party MLA, and he is a big supporter of the film.
Right.
So what's his take on this whole situation?
Well, Awad's position is very clear.
Sure.
He says that history, especially when it teaches us something important, can't and shouldn't be erased or sanitized. He believes that Phule is presenting a truthful account of history.
Yeah.
And that any attempt to change that because it makes people uncomfortable would be a disservice to the truth and to the legacy of the Fools.
He also acknowledges that there were Brahmins who supported the Fool's work.
Yes, he does.
But he insists that the ugly parts of history, the oppression and discrimination they faced,
Right.
are absolutely crucial to understanding their struggle
Yes.
and for society to learn and grow from it.
It's a very different perspective from the Brahmin Federation.
Definitely. And what about Anath Malevavan, the director of Phule? I mean, he's right in the thick of all of this. What's his stance?
Well, he's defending his film, as you'd expect.
Yeah.
He says it's historically accurate and that it's based on thorough research.
Hmm.
He admits that there might have been some cinematic liberties taken,
Sure.
Things you do when you're making a movie.
Right.
But he's adamant that the core historical narrative is authentic.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is that he seems to reject this idea of creating a sugar-coated version of the Phule's story,
Yeah.
implying that doing so would diminish the radical nature of their challenge to the social order of their time. He seems committed to presenting a truthful depiction, even if it makes some people uncomfortable.
Right. And it all underlines this ongoing tension, not just with this specific film,
Mm-hmm.
but more broadly, this question of how do you balance the need to be historically accurate with the desire to not offend anyone or to maintain social harmony.
It's like filmmakers are constantly walking a tightrope.
Exactly, especially when they're dealing with sensitive historical subjects. And this Phule controversy, it feels like it really exemplifies this broader issue.
Yes, it
It's
does.
about censorship and how we represent sensitive historical topics in Indian cinema.
Yeah.
We've seen these debates before, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, our sources mention films like Utta Punjab, which had tons of cuts,
Yeah.
Ishwarupam, which was initially banned in Tamil Nadu,
Right.
and Padmavat, which faced massive protests and even had to change its title.
Yeah, it seems like any film that tackles potentially controversial social or religious themes ends up in this kind of tricky situation.
Right.
It highlights this recurring clash between the creative freedom of filmmakers
Yeah.
and the concerns about keeping the peace,
Mm.
respecting sensitivities,
Right.
and, maybe even being careful about certain interpretations of historical events.
Yeah.
And often it's the CBFC that's stuck in the middle trying to balance all these different pressures.
Yeah, and in the case of Phule, after all the requested cuts, it's actually been given a U certificate,
Uh-huh.
which means it's considered suitable for everyone to watch. But as one of our sources put it, isn't that a bit like getting biryani without the spices?
Oh, yeah.
You've got the basic ingredients, but you've lost all the things that gave it its unique flavor and punch.
Right. Giving it the U certificate in this context does make you wonder if the film's original message and the director's artistic vision have been compromised.
Mm.
If
Yeah.
you have to take out crucial historical context just to get a rating
Yeah.
that's okay for everyone, you have to ask, can the film still effectively tell the story of the Sioux struggle and what it was really like back then? It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
And in the end, it'll be up to the audience to decide if it works.
Yeah. And the CBFC's reasons for making these decisions often feel so vague, don't they?
Yes, they do.
This talk about public order and morality.
Right.
These are such broad terms, especially when you're talking about historical narratives that are inherently going to deal with some uncomfortable social issues. What one person considers moral,
Right.
another might see as a necessary depiction of what happened in the past.
Exactly. And because those terms are so open to interpretation,
Yeah.
it can lead to decisions that seem subjective or even influenced by politics.
Right.
And when it comes to historical films, you have to ask whose definition of public order or morality is being prioritized.
Right.
And are those considerations actually overshadowing the importance of historical accuracy and open discussion about the past?
It's a really tough balancing act.
It is, with no easy answers.
Now let's talk about the delay of the release.
Yeah.
Moving it from April 11th to April 21st might seem like a small change.
Yeah.
But that original date was really significant symbolically, wasn't it?
It was releasing the film on Mahatma Phule's birth anniversary
Mm-hmm.
would have been a powerful way to honor his legacy
Mm-hmm.
and bring his story to a bigger audience on a day that's specifically about remembering him.
Right.
So the delay, it does take away from that a little bit. It shifts the focus just slightly.
Our sources also mention some more practical reasons for pushing back the release, like
Okay.
needing time to make the changes the CBFC asked for, potentially dealing with legal challenges that might come up,
Right.
and even just being strategic about the release schedule to avoid going head-to-head with other big films that are coming out, like Sunny Deol's Jate.
Yeah, it sounds like a whole bunch of different factors are at play here.
Definitely. And filmmaking is a complex business.
It is?
It involves so many creative, logistical, even political considerations.
Probably.
The delay seems like it's probably an attempt to manage all of these different things carefully
Right.
to make sure the film reaches people, but also to address the concerns from the CBFC and other groups. It's a complicated process.
Yeah, a lot goes into making these decisions.
One of our sources actually called the whole situation a foolproof mess,
That's funny.
which kind of sums up this whole intricate and slightly chaotic web of issues surrounding the film.
Yeah, it does. And it captures that irony, and maybe even some of the frustration that often comes with these kinds of controversies. A film that's meant to shine a light on historical injustices
Right.
ends up tangled up in the sensitivities of today and the whole complicated world of censorship.
If we step back for a minute, the whole Phule situation, it feels like a microcosm of this larger struggle that India is going through,
Yeah,
trying to balance artistic expression with this need for social harmony.
exactly. It's this constant back and forth between creative freedom
Yeah.
and what's considered acceptable or safe for society.
Right, and the Phules themselves were so radical in the way they challenged the deeply ingrained caste system of their time.
They were.
So any attempt to honestly depict their lives is going to touch on topics that are still sensitive
Yep.
and actively debated in India today. The question is, how do you tell these stories in a way that doesn't dilute their power, but also doesn't cause unnecessary social unrest?
It's a delicate balance.
It really is. And while I totally understand the desire for historical stories to be balanced
Right.
and to acknowledge that things were complicated back then, there's also this risk, isn't there, of accidentally erasing uncomfortable truths?
Yes, there is.
Just in an effort to achieve that balance.
While it's important for historical narratives to be accurate
Uh-huh.
and to acknowledge the different sides of the story,
Yeah.
they shouldn't shy away from showing the realities of injustice and oppression,
Right.
if those things existed. To erase or downplay those uncomfortable truths could lead to a distorted understanding of history.
Yeah.
And it might even make it harder for us to address the legacy of those past injustices today.
Right. Finding that middle ground between acknowledging diverse perspectives and being historically accurate, even when it's tough, that's a huge task for any society.
It's ongoing.
It is. So where do things stand with Phule right now?
Okay.
Today is April 9th, 2025. What's the latest?
Well, as of today, there is still a lot of unanswered questions.
Okay.
We don't know yet how the cuts the CBFC asked for will affect the film's overall message,
Yeah.
or how it'll impact the director's artistic vision,
Yeah.
and will the Brahmin groups keep voicing their concerns,
Right.
or can they come to some kind of agreement with the filmmakers?
Yeah.
And of course, the biggest unknown is how the general audience will react to the film when it finally comes out on April 21st.
Right.
That reception will probably spark even more discussion and debate.
Oh, yeah. Our sources also mentioned that the director Mahadevan has refused to do a special pre-release screening just for the Brahmin Federation,
Oh, wow.
which seems like a pretty firm stance on his part.
It does.
And then Jitendra Awad has made this strong statement calling for society to really confront its past.
Uh-huh.
So it definitely feels like things are set up for a potentially big moment when this film finally hits theaters.
Yeah. Mahadevan's decision seems to indicate that he's standing by his artistic vision.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that he's reluctant to change the film's content based on pressure from outside before the public gets to see it.
Yeah.
And then Awad's statement emphasizes these wider societal implications of the whole controversy.
Right.
This ongoing need for honesty and openness when we engage with our history, even when it involves difficult and uncomfortable truths.
Absolutely. Their different positions really highlight the complexities at the heart of this issue.
They do.
So to sum it all up, it seems like Phil's journey to the screen is about so much more than just releasing a movie.
It is.
It's really shining a light on how complicated it is to portray sensitive historical topics,
Yeah.
the role and influence of censorship, which is always there,
Yeah.
and the ongoing and often very passionate debates about caste in India.
Absolutely. This situation goes way beyond just one film.
Right.
It's a reflection of these bigger societal tensions and the challenges that come up when we try to engage with the difficult parts of our history through art. All the different reactions to Phule really highlight how the past continues to shape and affect us today, and how different groups interpret and engage with that past.
It really gets you thinking about the responsibility that art has when it portrays history.
Yeah.
Especially when it's about social injustices that still have an impact today.
Right.
How do we as a society find that balance between needing to be historically accurate
Right.
and also wanting to have social harmony? It's a tough question.
It is.
And what does this whole Phule controversy tell us about where we are right now with that delicate balance? It's something we all need to keep thinking about.
We do.